Imagine the feeling of never feeling safe, even in your own home. The conflict between Israel and Palestine has been fought for centuries, and it's important to know why and what is at stake. Both of my parents and their family lines were born in Palestine, and every time I have visited Palestine, I get these camels as a souvenir representing each time I have gone. There are 8 camels, and the big one being the first time I ever went. I have visited Palestine many times over the course of my life and have seen the terrible life they are forced to live. Here's my brother on the left, next to a house that would be considered extremely nice in the world they live in, next to one that is completely rubble and being rebuilt. This is a common occurrence all over Palestine. And on the right here is the Dome of the Rock that has also been fought for, as a show that I have been here multiple times. No human being should have to go through the struggle of simply living in their home. Would you allow soldiers to come into your home without probable cause and turn the place upside down? Some of the reasons that contributed to the cause of the conflict between Israel and Palestine include oppression of the Palestinian people at the hands of the IDF, the unfair split of the two countries by Britain, and a mixed account of the history of that land. The citizens of Palestine are constantly oppressed by the IDF. The Israeli Defense Force is responsible for ransacking multiple homes in all Palestinian villages simply to incite fear into its people. Here's a man demonstrating his support for Palestine, and in doing so, being wrongfully detained by the IDF, and children walking along the street being threatened to be shot at when they did nothing wrong. Is this not a form of terrorism? Causing widespread fear in order to control the populace and even make them flee from their homes? Borgen magazine writes, the Palestinian oppression in the territory has led to the crimes against humanity and fundamental deprivations. International criminal law states that the invasion of land and prosecution of Palestinians equates to discrimination and repression, which ultimately amounts to persecution. Persecution that fails to see its way towards Israel. They cause whole villages to desert their homes in order to make more room in the name of their nation. They call themselves the Defense Force, yet they must truly believe that offense is the best defense because that is how they are playing the game. While the IDF is at the forefront of the issue, they did not cause the current situation, only aggravate it. After World War II, the UN sought to correct the atrocities committed upon the Jewish people by the Nazis. In 1948, Britain made good on the Balfour Promise of 1917 and took 50% of the land owned by the country of Palestine, and created the nation of Israel. The editors of Encyclopaedia Britannica defined the Balfour Declaration as a statement of British support for the establishment in Palestine of a nation home for the Jewish people. As you can see in this photo, Palestinian land has lessened over time more and more, down to 85% Israel. However, this was not enough for the people of Israel. Despite receiving over half the land, Israel launched a preemptive strike on the neighboring Arab countries that ignited what would later be called the Six-Day War. Zach Beauchamp writes, the UN partition promised 56% of British Palestine for the Jewish state, but by the end of the war, Israel possessed 77%. Everything except the West Bank, the eastern quarter of Jerusalem, as well as the Gaza Strip. It left Israelis without a state, but not Palestinians. The Britannica Encyclopedia indicates that Israel staged a sudden preemptive air assault that destroyed more than 90% of Egypt's air force. As you can see here, the aftermath of the Six-Day War led Israel to completely control the Sinai Peninsula and the Suez Canal. Afterwards, Israel did give the land back to Egypt in good faith for a peace treaty, and Egypt has now recognized Israel as a country. In light of the news, Israel combated the news of oppression by arguing that they had a right to the land because their ancestors were on it first. The land of Israel and Palestine has been fought for over centuries. Many conquests were laid and more victors emerged. This was especially true during the time of the Crusades. Ownership of Jerusalem, the holy city, has bounced between two religions mainly, the countries that followed Christianity and the people of Islam. According to Deseret News, there were 9 crusades. Each one switched the victor between Christians and Muslims except the 8th, which was a standstill. By the end of the Crusades, Muslims had control of Jerusalem and Acre. Now, where do Israel and Judaism come to play in this territory? The first settlers predate these conquests by some millennia. Oren Dorrell, a writer for USA Today, shows a history of how a humble village on a scrubby hilltop became the holy city that provoked centuries of dispute. It is believed that in 3000 BC, the Canaanites were the first settlers of the Holy Land, and according to the Bible, King David conquered this land around 1000 BC and created his new realm for the Jews. The nation of Israel is backed by shaky evidence that they were there thousands of years ago. It is claimed that around 800 BC, Arabs conquered the land and have had control of it until the 20th century. Arabs living in Palestine have been facing constant oppression by the nation of Israel, and there are no measures being taken to stop them. Israel has deployed the IDF to terrorize the Arab civilians of Palestine. The UN gave over half of the country to Israel and left the conflict up to them. And Israel is using that as an excuse that they were there before Arabs, over 3,000 years ago, to justify their oppression and occupation. There is a very probable solution to the conflict between Israel and Palestine, a solution that is unlikely to happen because it would require the nation of Israel to suddenly wise up and see the error in their ways. It would be to split the country between the two countries and make Palestine a sovereign nation. Although this may cause some displacement between both parties, the conflict and oppression would dissipate once and for all.